Something inside me finally broke, not with a crash, but with the quiet finality of ice cracking beneath your feet on a winter lake. I stood in the doorway, my grocery bag still clutched in my trembling hands, and realized my son hadn't just invaded my space. He'd erased me from it entirely. Let me tell you what led to that moment. My name is Elaine Woodridge. For 42 years, I worked as a nurse at Greenfield Community Hospital in Massachusetts, a small town where the seasons change as predictably as the morning light, and where everyone knew me as the nurse who never took vacations, who worked overtime during holidays, who cared for the elderly with a patience many mistook for submission. It wasn't submission, it was determination. Determination to fulfill the dream that kept me standing after Frank, my husband, died of a heart attack at 45. A simple dream: to own a small house on the shores of Lake Wintergreen, where the sunset reflects on the water as if the sky were pouring liquid gold. A place where I could sit on the porch, listen to the wind in the trees, and finally breathe in peace. Away from the antiseptic smell, the heart monitors, and the screams of pain that filled my professional life. I raised my son Nathan, now 38, alone. I sacrificed everything for his well-being and education. Sleepless nights, rushed meals between double shifts, mended clothes so he could have new books. It worked. He graduated in business administration, got a good job at a marketing company, married Vanessa, a beautiful 36-year-old woman, and gave me 2 wonderful grandchildren, Emma, 9, and Lucas, 7. Last spring, I finally realized my dream. I bought the wooden house by the lake with 3 bedrooms, a spacious porch, and large windows that let light in from all sides. The scent of pine trees enveloped everything. The sound of birds gently woke me every morning. For the first time in decades, my hands stopped trembling from exhaustion. Finally, at 67, I had found my sanctuary. One Tuesday in April, Nathan appeared at my door without warning. His face was haggard, his eyes red. "Mom, Vanessa asked for a divorce," he said, his voice breaking. My heart tightened. I hugged him like when he was small and had scraped his knees. I told him to stay as long as he needed, a gesture of maternal love that would change everything. 1 week turned into 1 month. My haven of silence began to change. Nathan left dirty dishes around the house, loud music during the day, empty beer cans on the porch where I used to meditate while watching the lake. Small disrespects that I overlooked because I understood his pain. Then came the first turning point. One Friday, I returned from the grocery store and found 5 strangers in my living room drinking and laughing loudly. The smell of cigarettes permeated the curtains I had sewn by hand. Nathan introduced them as coworkers who came to cheer up his weekend. "It's just this once, Mom, I promise," he said with a weak smile. But it wasn't just that one time. The next week, there were 8 people. The following week, more than 15. My silence transformed into thunder. My serene lake became the backdrop for noisy jet skis that Nathan bought to distract himself from depression. My contemplative porch became a space for barbecues that lasted until dawn. That Saturday morning, when I found the young woman in my bed, wearing my robe, something fundamental shifted inside me. "Sorry, Mrs. Woodridge," she mumbled, embarrassed. "Nathan said it wouldn't be a problem." I confronted my son as he prepared coffee with hangover-swollen eyes. "Nathan, this needs to stop. This house is my dream, my sanctuary." "Mom, I'm going through a difficult time. You don't understand what it's like to have your marriage destroyed. I need distraction." His words hit me like a slap. I, who had lost my husband to death, who raised a child alone, who worked decades without rest, didn't understand loss. That night, alone on the porch while another party happened inside my house, I made a decision. I called Agnes Thornfield, my 70-year-old friend and former hospital colleague. I asked if she could host me for a few days. I packed a small suitcase and left without anyone noticing my absence amid the deafening music. I spent 2 weeks at Agnes's cozy downtown Greenfield apartment. She didn't ask questions, just offered me chamomile tea every night and space to cry when I needed it. It was Agnes who reminded me that my kindness couldn't turn into weakness. "Elaine," she said one night as we watched the city lights from her window, "you've spent your life caring for others. Now you need to care for yourself." I returned home on a rainy Wednesday. What I found left me breathless. Broken bottles in the garden I had planted with such care, damaged furniture, stains on the carpet, and Nathan sleeping on the couch at 2 in the afternoon, completely ignoring the messages Vanessa had left about visits with the children that he had been postponing. That night, after he left for another party with friends, I did something I never thought I would do. I called Vanessa. Our conversation lasted hours. I discovered that the divorce wasn't her idea, as Nathan had led me to believe. It was he who asked for separation, claiming he needed freedom. Vanessa was devastated, trying to explain to their children why their father rarely visited them. When I hung up the phone, I cried as I hadn't since Frank's death, not for my son, but for myself, for having been so easily deceived, for allowing my dream to be stolen. The next morning, Nathan returned staggering at 6 in the morning. He found me sitting in the kitchen with an untouched cup of coffee in front of me. "I spoke with Vanessa yesterday," I said without preamble. His face paled. The mask fell. "Mom, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "I understand that you lied, that you're using my house, my sanctuary, as an escape to avoid facing your responsibilities, that you've abandoned your children." What followed was an argument like we'd never had before. Nathan shouted. I kept my voice calm. He broke a glass. I didn't move. He accused me of not loving him enough. I reminded him of every sacrifice I'd made for him. "You have until tomorrow to leave," I finally said. "This house represents every extra hour I worked, every vacation I never took, every dream I postponed. I will not allow you to transform it into a symbol of your irresponsibility." "You would kick me out? Your own son?" he asked, incredulous. "I'm giving you the chance to leave on your own with dignity, to become again the man I raised, not this shadow I see before me." He left, slamming the door. I thought I would never see him again. I spent the week cleaning the house, fixing what could be fixed, crying over what was irreparably lost. The silence, which I had so desired, now weighed like lead. 3 weeks later, while watering the new flowers I had planted in the garden, a car stopped at the entrance. It was Nathan. Beside him, Emma and Lucas, my grandchildren. The children ran to hug me. Nathan remained by the car, hesitant. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice different, more sober. We sat on the porch, the children playing by the lake under our watchful eye. Nathan told me he had rented a small apartment, started therapy, and had a serious conversation with Vanessa about sharing custody of the children. "You were right, Mom. About everything. I ran from my responsibilities. I used your generosity. I destroyed the dream you worked your entire life for." I didn't respond immediately. I observed the ripples on the lake water, the reflection of the setting sun. "You know what hurt the most?" I finally asked. "Seeing you transform into someone I don't recognize. Someone who lies, who abandons his own children, who doesn't respect others' space. That's not the man I raised." "I know that now," he said, his voice breaking. "And I want to fix everything, starting here." In the months that followed, Nathan came on weekends, not for parties, but to help me rebuild what had been damaged. We painted walls together. We fixed the garden fence. He brought the grandchildren to fish in the lake. Vanessa and I developed an unexpected friendship. In our conversations, I discovered how much she suffered trying to save a marriage that Nathan had mentally abandoned long before the divorce. In the fall, when the tree leaves began to tint the landscape red and gold, Nathan surprised me again. "I scheduled a family therapy session," he said during a Sunday lunch. "Me, you, Vanessa, and the kids, if you want to participate." It was during these sessions, conducted by Dr. Marion Lewis, a 60-year-old therapist with gentle eyes and a firm voice, that the truth finally emerged. Nathan confessed that he had always felt inferior to the father he barely knew, that he grew up seeing my sacrifices and developed a silent resentment, feeling he could never live up to my expectations. "You were perfect, Mom," he said in one of the sessions, tears streaming down his face. Strong, tireless, dedicated. How could I compete with that? When my marriage began to fail, I felt it confirmed what I had always feared, that I was a failure. Those words hit me like never before. In all my life of work, sacrifice, and determination, I never realized the weight my example placed on his shoulders. I never imagined that my strength could be intimidating. "Nathan," I replied, holding his hands, "I spent my life trying to be strong for you. I never realized that could make you feel weak. Forgive me for not seeing this sooner." Today, 1 year after that terrible summer, my lakeside house is once again a sanctuary. But not just mine. It's the place where Nathan brings his children on weekends, where Vanessa and I prepare Sunday lunches, where Agnes comes to have tea and watch the sunset. The silence I sought so much has been replaced by something more valuable. The sound of a family reconnecting, healing. The sound of children's laughter, honest conversations, forgiveness. I understood that I sacrificed so much for the house of my dreams that I almost lost what really mattered, the family I worked my entire life for. My son needed not only my example of strength, but also my vulnerability, to know that I make mistakes too, that I also have fears. The house remains on the shores of Lake Wintergreen. The waters still reflect the sky like liquid gold at dusk. But now, when I observe this natural spectacle, I'm not alone on the porch, and I've discovered there's more peace in this company than in all the silence I once desired. Have you ever noticed how the things we sacrifice everything for can sometimes blind us to what we're really sacrificing? I wonder about this every evening now as the sun sets over Lake Wintergreen. Before I continue, if you've ever discovered a truth too late, check if you're subscribed. Here, every story is a mirror of life. My journey to that lakeside cottage began decades earlier in the sterile hallways of Greenfield Community Hospital. I was 25 when I started working there, freshly married to Frank, with dreams as crisp and promising as new bed sheets. We had plans, children, travel, growing old, watching sunsets together. Frank worked construction, building other people's dream homes while we saved for our own. "Someday," he'd say, tracing his calloused finger across property listings, "we'll have our place by water, somewhere quiet where we can hear ourselves think." We were 7 years into our marriage when Nathan was born. Frank would hold him by the window each morning, pointing out birds and trees, whispering promises of fishing trips and canoe adventures. "We'll teach you to swim in a lake, not some chlorinated pool," he'd say, while Nathan grabbed at his father's beard with tiny, determined fists. Frank never got to fulfill those promises. When Nathan was just 3, my husband collapsed at a construction site. Massive heart attack, the doctors said. No warning signs, no chance for goodbyes, just the sudden, brutal absence where a life had been. I remember standing in our small rented house after the funeral, Nathan clutching my leg, asking when Daddy was coming home. The weight of single motherhood settled onto my shoulders like a coat made of stone. I was 28, a widow with a toddler, and a mortgage we could barely afford on 2 incomes, let alone 1. That night, after putting Nathan to bed, I found Frank's collection of lakeside property listings, his dreams, carefully organized in a worn manila folder. I sat on our kitchen floor until dawn, crying over those pages, until something hardened inside me. A resolve. I would give Nathan everything Frank would have wanted for him, and someday I would realize the dream they both deserved. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital. Nights, weekends, holidays. My colleagues with families would ask, "Elaine, don't you want Christmas with your boy?" Of course I did, but I wanted his future, Morta. My parents helped when they could, watching Nathan when my shifts ran long. Our apartment was small, 2 bedrooms in a building where the heat worked sporadically and the neighbors fought loudly. But I made it home. I painted Nathan's room blue like the lake in Frank's favorite property listing. I planted window boxes with flowers that spilled over the sill, bringing nature to our concrete surroundings. Nathan grew into a serious child, watchful and quiet. He excelled at school, bringing home perfect report cards that I'd hang on the refrigerator with overwhelming pride. "Just like your father," I'd tell him. "He was smart too, just never had the chances you'll have." Sometimes I'd catch Nathan staring at Frank's photograph, studying the face of the father he couldn't remember. "Was he funny?" he'd ask. "Was he strict? Did he like baseball?" I'd fill in the blanks of his father as best I could, but some questions have no answers a child can understand. "Why did he have to die?" Nathan asked once when he was 7. My throat closed around the words. "Sometimes people leave before they want to," I finally said, "but they leave us their dreams to finish." By the time Nathan reached high school, I had worked my way up to charge nurse. Better pay, more responsibility, but still not enough for college tuition and a lakeside property. I chose Nathan's education without hesitation. The lake could wait, his future couldn't. He graduated high school with honors and a scholarship that covered half his university costs. I took out loans for the rest, adding years to my working life without regret. During his college years, Nathan blossomed. The serious boy became a confident young man. He joined clubs, made friends, studied business with the intensity I recognized from my own nature. It was during his junior year that he met Vanessa. She was studying education, wanted to teach elementary school. The first time he brought her home to our small apartment, I saw the way he watched her, like she was water in a desert, the same way Frank had once looked at me. "She's the one, Mom," he told me later that night. "I just know it." I believed him. What I didn't say was how seeing their young love reopened the wound of my own loss, how watching them plan their future made me ache for the one that had been stolen from me. Instead, I hugged him and said, "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become." They married a year after graduation. I wore blue and cried through the ceremony, feeling both Frank's absence and his presence so acutely I could barely breathe. Nathan and Vanessa found jobs in Greenfield, bought a small starter home not far from my apartment. When Emma was born 2 years later, followed by Lucas 2 years after that, my world expanded with a love I hadn't known was possible. Those years were a blur of work and family. I'd finish night shifts and go straight to Nathan's house to watch the children while Vanessa taught school, and he built his career. Exhaustion became my constant companion, but so did purpose. Every hour at the hospital, every dollar saved, brought me closer to Frank's dream, our dream. The children grew, my hair grayed, my hands developed the slight tremor common to nurses who've spent decades administering precise dosages. My colleagues started retiring. "When will you join us, Elaine?" they'd ask at their farewell parties. "Don't you want to rest?" Rest wasn't part of my vocabulary, not yet. By my 65th birthday, I had saved enough for a modest down payment on a lakeside property. I started looking, spending my rare days off driving to different lakes within an hour of Greenfield. None felt right until I saw the cottage on Lake Wintergreen. It wasn't fancy, weathered cedar siding, a stone chimney, windows that needed replacing, but it sat on a gentle slope leading down to water so clear you could see fish darting beneath the surface. Pine and maple trees provided shade and privacy. And the sunset, Frank would have loved that sunset. I walked the property with the real estate agent, a young woman who couldn't understand why a woman my age would want such a secluded place. "Won't you be lonely?" she asked. I smiled, watching a heron land silently on the dock. "I've spent my life surrounded by people in pain," I told her. "Silence sounds like heaven." The asking price was more than I had saved, but not by much. I took out a small mortgage, calculated that 5 more years of work would pay it off, and signed the papers with hands that trembled not from age, but from disbelief. After 42 years, Frank's dream, our dream, was finally coming true. I didn't retire immediately. The mortgage payments and renovation costs required my nursing salary a while longer, but every free moment was spent at the lake house, painting walls, replacing fixtures, planting a garden that would bloom from spring through fall. Nathan and his family helped occasionally, though their busy lives limited their time. "Mom, this place is amazing," Nathan said one Saturday as we replaced kitchen cabinet handles. "But are you sure you want to be out here alone? It's pretty isolated." "That's exactly why I want it," I told him, running my hand along the freshly painted wall. "I've earned my quiet." He looked troubled, but said nothing more. Later, I overheard him telling Vanessa, "I worry about her. What if she falls? What if she gets sick out here all alone?" I wanted to interrupt, to tell him that I'd spent my life caring for people who fell, who got sick, that I knew more about managing crisis than he could imagine, but I let it go. His concern came from love, even if it was misplaced. By the spring of my 67th year, the cottage was finally ready, and I retired from nursing. My colleagues threw a party at the hospital, presented me with a plaque commemorating my 42 years of service. "What will you do with all that free time?" they asked. "Listen to the wind," I told them. "Read books, watch birds, just be." The first weeks at the lake were everything I'd dreamed. I established gentle routines: coffee on the porch at sunrise, gardening in the cool morning hours, reading in the afternoon, walking along the shore at dusk. I slept more deeply than I had in decades, lulled by the rhythmic lapping of water against the shore and the absence of hospital alarms. Nathan and his family visited on Sundays. The children loved exploring the lake edge, collecting stones and feathers, learning the names of tree and birds. Vanessa would help me prepare lunch while Nathan took the kids out in the rowboat I'd bought secondhand. "You seem happy, Elaine," Vanessa said one Sunday as we washed dishes together. "More relaxed than I've ever seen you." "I am," I admitted. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm living for myself." She dried a plate slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I admire that. The way you've always known what you wanted." Something in her tone made me look closer. Shadows under her eyes, tension in her shoulders. "Is everything all right, Vanessa?" She forced a smile. "Just busy. The kids, work, you know how it is." I did know, but I sensed something more behind her words, a current of unhappiness she wasn't ready to share. Before I could press further, Nathan and the children returned, wet and laughing from their boat ride, and the moment passed. 2 weeks later, Nathan appeared at my door, alone and broken. "Vanessa asked for a divorce," he said, his voice cracking on the final word. The shock hit me, physically, a tightness in my chest, a cold rush along my spine. Not because divorce was unimaginable, but because I'd seen no warning signs. Or had I chosen not to see them? I made him tea, sat him at my kitchen table, and listened as the story spilled out in jagged pieces. According to Nathan, Vanessa had changed, become distant, said she needed space to find herself. Classic language of marital dissolution that revealed everything and nothing. "Can I stay here a few days?" he asked, looking around the cottage with red-rimmed eyes. "I can't face the empty house yet." How could I refuse my own child in pain? "Stay as long as you need," I said, squeezing his hand. "This is your home too." Those words, meant as comfort, would soon become a bitter irony. The first few days, Nathan was the son I remembered, helpful, considerate, grateful. He fixed the leaky bathroom faucet I'd been meaning to address. He chopped firewood for the coming fall. He joined my quiet routines with minimal disruption. But as the first week stretched into the second, subtle changes emerged. He started sleeping later, sometimes until noon. Empty beer bottles accumulated faster than I could discreetly dispose of them. His phone buzzed constantly with texts he'd check with furrowed brows. "Work," he'd explain dismissively. "They can't function without me." I gave him space, understanding that grief manifests differently in everyone. When he started playing music while working on his laptop at the kitchen table, I adjusted, moving my reading to the bedroom. When he began taking long drives and returning with the sharp smell of bar smoke clinging to his clothes, I told myself he was processing his pain. The first real fracture in my sanctuary came 3 weeks after his arrival. I returned from my weekly grocery trip to find 3 unfamiliar cars in my driveway and the sound of male laughter booming from inside my home. I entered my own living room as if I were the intruder. 5 men sprawled across my furniture, beer bottles balanced on the antique side tables I'd carefully refinished, cigarette smoke hanging in the air despite my well-known no-smoking rule. Nathan jumped up when he saw me, a forced brightness in his voice. "Mom, Come meet the guys from work. They came up to cheer me up." I smiled stiffly through introductions, noting how none of them fully met my eyes. They knew they were intruding. They simply didn't care. "We'll clean everything up, Mrs. W," one of them promised, raising his beer in a mock toast. "Nathan said you're cool about this stuff." I looked at my son, searching for the boy I raised in this stranger's face. He gave me a pleading look, a silent request for understanding. I retreated to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed, listening to my peaceful home transform into something unrecognizable. They left around midnight, engines revving loudly as they departed down the quiet country road. I emerged to find Nathan half-heartedly gathering bottles, ashtrays balanced precariously on my grandmother's hand-embroidered cushions. "I'm sorry about the noise," he said, not meeting my eyes. "The guys really needed to blow off steam. Work's been intense." I looked at the cigarette burns on my coffee table, the beer stains on the rug I'd saved 3 months to buy. "Nathan, this can't happen again. This is my home, my sanctuary." He straightened, something defensive flashing across his face. "I thought it was my home too. That's what you said." "Of course it's your home," I backpedaled, hating the fragility I heard in my own voice. "But there need to be boundaries, respect for this space." "It won't happen again," he promised, hugging me awkwardly. I just needed one night with friends, to feel normal again. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, so I chose to, despite the sinking feeling in my stomach as I scrubbed at stains long after he'd gone to bed. But it did happen again. The following weekend brought twice as many people, work friends and their girlfriends, strangers who traipsed through my garden, who used my bathroom without closing the door, who left half-eaten plates of food on bookshelves and windowsills. Nathan no longer asked permission. He simply informed me, usually hours before people arrived. "Having a few friends over tonight, Mom. Don't worry about dinner for me." Or worse, I'd come home from a walk to find my space already invaded, music already too loud for conversation. The cottage transformed. My carefully chosen throw pillows disappeared, replaced by garish ones Nathan ordered online. My reading nook became storage for the beer cooler. The bird feeders I'd installed to attract cardinals and chickadees were knocked down during a drunken game of outdoor darts. I became a ghost in my own home, retreating to my bedroom earlier each night, placing a chair against the door not out of fear, but from a desperate need for one inviolate space. I started taking longer walks, finding excuses to visit town, calling old colleagues for coffee. Anything to avoid witnessing what was happening to my dream. 6 weeks after Nathan arrived, he bought 2 jet skis with money I later discovered he'd borrowed against his 401k. The peaceful lake where I'd watched herons fish and turtles sun themselves became a churning, noisy playground. Neighbors I'd barely had time to meet began calling with complaints. The local lake association left notices about noise and wake regulations on my door. When I tried to discuss it with Nathan, his responses grew increasingly hostile. "I'm going through hell right now, Mom. My marriage is over. My kids are being turned against me. Can't I have one thing that makes me feel better?" The manipulation was obvious, but no less effective. Each time I retreated, silenced by guilt and the fear of pushing away my only child. Each time the boundaries moved further until I couldn't recognize my life anymore. The morning I found the young woman in my bed was the culmination of a particularly raucous party. I'd taken sleeping pills, something I'd never needed before, and still been awakened repeatedly by shouts, breaking glass, and music that vibrated through the floorboards. Around 3 in the morning, the noise finally subsided enough for me to fall into fitful sleep. I woke early, as decades of nursing shifts had programmed me to do, and decided to drive to town for groceries. Better to be gone when the inevitable hangover complaints began. I dressed quietly, slipped out to my car, and spent 2 peaceful hours wandering the farmer's market, pretending this was a normal Saturday. When I returned and found my bedroom door ajar, I assumed Nathan had borrowed something. Instead, I found a young woman I vaguely recognized from previous gatherings, her makeup smeared across her face, her body wrapped in my favorite robe, the soft blue one Frank had given me our last Christmas together. "Sorry, Mrs. Woodridge," she mumbled when she saw me frozen in the doorway. "Nathan said it wouldn't be a problem." I backed out wordlessly, grocery bag still in hand, and walked to the kitchen where Nathan stood making coffee, shirtless, his eyes bloodshot. "Why is there a woman in my bed?" I asked, my voice eerily calm even to my own ears. He didn't turn around. "Melissa crashed here. The guest room was taken and you were gone, so—" He shrugged as if this explained everything. I wasn't gone. I was sleeping, then went for groceries. I set the bags on the counter with deliberate care. And she's wearing my robe, the one Dad gave me. Something in my tone finally made him look at me. "It's just a robe, Mom. I'll have it washed." "It's not just a robe." My voice remained quiet, but something had changed in it. Something had hardened. "It's my robe, in my room, in my house. The house I worked 42 years to afford while raising you alone." He rolled his eyes, a gesture so dismissive it stole my breath. "Here we go. St. Elaine, the martyr of Greenfield Hospital. Do you know how tired I am of hearing about your sacrifices?" The words hit like physical blows. I steadied myself against the counter, suddenly aware of the other people in my home, strangers watching this exchange from various states of hangover around my living room. "Nathan, this needs to stop," I said, still quiet but firm. "This house is my dream, my sanctuary." "Mom, I'm going through a difficult time," he snapped. "You don't understand what it's like to have your marriage destroyed. I need distraction." The audacity of his statement hung between us. I, who had not just lost a marriage but a husband to death, who had raised a child alone, who had worked decades without rest, didn't understand loss. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not grief but entitlement, not pain but selfishness. This wasn't about processing divorce. This was about a man who had found a convenient escape from responsibility, a free lakeside party house with a built-in housekeeper who could be emotionally manipulated into compliance. I said nothing more. What was there to say to someone who could so completely rewrite our shared history? Instead, I turned and walked out onto the porch, closing the door softly behind me. I sat in my favorite chair, watching the lake shimmer under the morning sun, and allowed the tears to come. That evening, after another party started, this one seemingly spontaneous, people arriving with cases of beer and bottles of liquor as if my home had been designated the local free-for-all, I made my decision. I packed a small suitcase with essentials, wrote a note telling Nathan I needed a few days away, and slipped out to my car without anyone noticing my departure. I drove to Agnes Thornfield's apartment in town. Agnes had been my colleague for 30 years before her retirement, a no-nonsense woman whose friendship had sustained me through some of my darkest days after Frank's death. I hadn't called ahead, but when she opened her door and saw me standing there, suitcase in hand, she simply stepped aside. "The spare room is made up," she said, taking my bag. "I'll put on the kettle." That night, sitting in Agnes's tidy living room with a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, I finally allowed myself to say the words aloud. "I've lost my son," I said, my voice breaking. "Or maybe I never really knew him at all." Agnes, never one for empty platitudes, considered this. "Maybe," she agreed. "Or maybe he's lost himself and is taking you down with him." I stayed with Agnes for 2 weeks. During that time, Nathan called exactly twice, both times to ask when I was coming home, both times without apologizing or acknowledging why I'd left. I told him I needed time to think, that I would return when I was ready. Agnes and I fell into an easy routine. We would have coffee together in the mornings, then she would go to her volunteer work at the library while I walked around town, rediscovering places I hadn't had time to visit in years. In the evenings, we would cook simple meals and watch old movies or play cards. No music blasting through the walls. No strangers invading our space. Just quiet companionship and respect. "You know," Agnes said one evening as we sat on her small balcony watching the town lights, "you spent your whole life caring for others. First Frank, then Nathan, then your patients. When do you get to care for Elaine?" The question startled me. "I'm caring for myself. The lake house was supposed to be your sanctuary," she interrupted gently, but you've allowed it to become Nathan's playground because you're still putting his needs before your own. That's not caring for yourself, Elaine. That's continuing the same pattern you've followed your entire adult life. I started to protest, then stopped, recognizing the truth in her words. Even now, away from the chaos, I was worrying about Nathan. Whether he was eating properly, whether he was safe driving after drinking, whether the house was being maintained. My concern wasn't just maternal, it was habitual, a deeply ingrained pattern of prioritizing others at my own expense. I don't know how to stop, I admitted. I've been Nathan's mother for so long, I don't know how to be anything else. Agnes took my hand, her skin papery against mine. You were Elaine before you were Nathan's mother. You were Elaine before you were Frank's wife or Greenfield Hospital's most dedicated nurse. That Elaine deserves to exist again. I returned to my lake house on a Wednesday afternoon, driving through a gentle rain that made the world seem soft at the edges. I had called Nathan that morning to tell him I was coming home, but he hadn't answered. I left a message, then turned off my phone, wanting the quiet of the rain-washed road for the drive. What I found when I arrived stole the breath from my lungs. The front garden, where I'd planted lavender and black-eyed Susans, was trampled and littered with cigarette butts and broken bottles. The porch furniture was rearranged into what looked like a makeshift bar area, complete with a beer keg. Through the windows, I could see my living room had been rearranged as well, the couch pushed against the wall, the reading lamp missing entirely. I used my key with a strange hesitancy, as if I were entering someone else's home. The interior smelled of stale beer and old food. Dishes were piled in the sink and on counters. Ashtrays, which I didn't even own, had been improvised from my grandmother's china saucers. And there, sprawled on the couch in the middle of the afternoon, was Nathan, snoring loudly, an empty whiskey bottle on the floor beside him. The coffee table was strewn with papers, and as I moved closer, I recognized Vanessa's handwriting on several envelopes. I shouldn't have looked. Some last vestige of maternal respect told me not to invade his privacy, but something stronger, perhaps self-preservation, pushed me forward. I picked up one of the envelopes, already opened, and removed the letter inside. Nathan, it began, I'm writing again because you haven't responded to my calls or texts for 2 weeks. The children are asking about you. Emma's birthday is next Saturday, and she's desperate for you to come. Please, if not for me, then for them. They need their father. The letter was dated 3 weeks earlier. I picked up another, then another. All from Vanessa, all increasingly desperate, all apparently unread and certainly unanswered. The final one, dated just days ago, was shorter and cooler in tone. Since you continue to ignore my attempts to arrange visitation, I've spoken with an attorney. If you want to see your children, you'll need to respond to the court's communication. I never wanted it to come to this. I replaced the letters exactly as I'd found them. My hands. Trembling not with age, but with a rage so pure it frightened me. This wasn't just about my invaded space anymore. This was about 2 children being abandoned by their father while he played out some midlife crisis in my home. I spent that evening cleaning, channeling my anger into scrubbing and organizing. Nathan woke briefly around 6, mumbled something about getting food later, and went to the guest room to continue sleeping. I let him go, not trusting myself to speak yet. By midnight, I had restored some semblance of order to the main living areas. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, waiting. Shortly after 2 a.m, headlights swept across the windows as a car pulled into the driveway. Nathan entered a few minutes later, bringing with him the smell of bar smoke and woman's perfume. He started visibly when he saw me sitting there. "Jesus, Mom, you scared me," he said, flipping on more lights. "I thought you'd be asleep." "I saw Vanessa's letters," I said without preamble. His face changed, shuttering closed. "You went through my things?" "They were spread across the coffee table for anyone to see," I replied evenly, "just like you've spread your crisis across every inch of my home." He moved to the refrigerator, pulled out a beer, popped the tab with deliberate casualness. "It's not what you think. Vanessa's being dramatic." "Emma's birthday," I said. "Did you miss your daughter's birthday?" He took a long drink, avoiding my eyes. I sent a gift. I had stuff going on. Stuff. The word hung between us, laden with all the parties, all the strangers, all the irresponsibility of the past weeks. Your children need their father, Nathan. Don't start, Mom. His voice took on a warning edge. You have no idea what's going on between me and Vanessa. You're right, I agreed, surprising him. I don't know what's happening in your marriage, but I do know what's happening in my home, and it stops now. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. What stops? Me living here? You invited me, remember? I invited my son to stay while he healed from a painful divorce, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I did not invite a stranger to turn my home into a party house while ignoring his children and responsibilities. Stranger? He slammed the beer can down, liquid sloshing onto the clean counter. I'm your son. Are you? I asked quietly, because the son I raised would never treat his children, or his mother, this way. What followed was an argument unlike any we'd ever had. Nathan's voice rose. Mine remained level. He paced the kitchen like a caged animal. I stayed seated, hands folded on the table. He made accusations that I had always been cold, that I had used him as a replacement for Frank, that I cared more about my precious lake house than his happiness. Each barb was designed to hit where I was most vulnerable, to activate the guilt that had driven our relationship for decades. In the past, they would have worked. I would have backed down, apologized, accommodated. But something had shifted during my stay with Agnes. Some fundamental understanding that loving my son didn't mean enabling his worst behaviors. You have until tomorrow evening to leave, I finally said when he paused for breath. Take whatever belongs to you and go. His face registered shock, then anger, then a calculated hurt. You would throw out your only child after everything you claim to have sacrificed for me? I'm not throwing you out, I replied, standing at last. I'm giving you the opportunity to leave with dignity, to go be the father your children deserve, the man I know you can be. And if I refuse? He challenged. This is my home too. You said so yourself. I looked at him steadily, this grown man using a child's tactics. Then I will call the sheriff in the morning and have you removed as a trespasser. And believe me, Nathan, given the state of this house when I return, there isn't a judge in this county who would side with you. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the weakness he'd always been able to exploit. Finding none, he grabbed his keys from the counter. Keep your precious house, he spat. I never wanted to be here anyway. The door slammed behind him with such force that a framed photograph fell from the wall. Frank holding newborn Nathan in the hospital, both of their faces peaceful in that frozen moment of new life and possibility. The glass cracked diagonally, a jagged line separating father from son. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I picked up the broken frame, carefully removed the photograph, and placed it in a drawer for safekeeping. Then I went to bed in my own room, in my own house, and slept more soundly than I had in months. The next day, Nathan returned while I was gardening. He didn't speak as he filled 2 suitcases with his belongings. I continued planting new flowers to replace those that had been trampled, giving him the space to leave with whatever dignity he could muster. When his car pulled away, I didn't watch it go. The silence that followed was both blessing and curse. I had my sanctuary back, but at what cost? I spent days cleaning, repairing, restoring. I repainted walls marked by careless hands. I replaced rugs stained beyond salvation. I aired out rooms, opened windows, burned sage to cleanse not just the air but the emotional residue of conflict. And in the quiet evenings, sitting on my porch watching the lake turn golden with sunset, I allowed myself to grieve. Not just for the current rift with Nathan, but for all the complicated layers of our relationship, for the ways my well-intentioned sacrifices might have burdened rather than benefited him, for the father he barely knew, for the mother I might have been in a different life. I thought about calling him many times. My finger would hover over his name in my phone, but I never pressed it. This breach needed time for both of us to reflect, to grow, to understand our own parts in the dysfunction. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I called Vanessa. Our first conversation was awkward, halting. She was understandably wary, perhaps expecting me to defend Nathan or make excuses for his behavior. Instead, I simply asked about the children. "They miss their grandmother," she said after a pause. "Emma asks about you almost as much as she asks about Nathan." "I miss them too," I admitted, more than I can say. A tentative friendship began from that call. Vanessa would update me on the children's activities, Emma's dance recital, Lucas's soccer games. I sent small gifts, books, art supplies, handwritten cards. We never directly discussed Nathan, creating a careful space around his absence that allowed our own relationship to develop independently. 3 weeks after Nathan left, Vanessa called with an unexpected question. "The kids have been asking to see the lake," she said hesitantly. "Would it be okay if we visited this weekend? Just for the afternoon?" My heart leapt at the prospect. I'd love that more than anything. That Saturday, I spent the morning baking cookies and preparing the guest room with fresh linens, just in case. I put out birdseed and set up the children's fishing rods on the dock. I wanted everything to be perfect, to create a memory strong enough to bridge the painful gap in our family. When their car pulled into the driveway shortly after noon, I was waiting on the porch, trying to contain my nervous energy. Emma and Lucas tumbled out first, running toward me with the uninhibited joy only children can express. I knelt to receive their hugs, breathing in the scent of their hair, feeling their small bodies solid and real against mine. Vanessa followed more slowly, offering a shy smile. And then, unexpectedly, another car door opened. Nathan stepped out, his posture uncertain, his face thinner than when I'd last seen him. Our eyes met over the children's heads. I stood slowly, keeping one hand on Lucas's shoulder. "I hope it's okay," Vanessa said quickly. "He's been seeing the kids regularly for the past 2 weeks. When they asked about the lake, he wanted to come too. We can leave if—" "It's fine," I interrupted, my eyes still on Nathan. "Everyone is welcome." The afternoon unfolded with a tentative grace. The children explored the lakefront, collecting stones and feathers, asking endless questions about fish and turtles. Vanessa helped me prepare a simple lunch, our movements around the kitchen becoming more comfortable as the hours passed. Nathan remained mostly silent, watching the children with an intensity that spoke of recognition, perhaps of what he'd nearly lost, perhaps of his own childhood ghosts. After lunch, he asked if he could take them out in the rowboat. I nodded, watching from the porch as he carefully settled them with life jackets, his movements gentle and attentive. "He's trying," Vanessa said quietly, joining me. "He started therapy 2 weeks ago, moved into a small apartment near our house so he can see the kids more easily." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "He won't talk about what happened here," she continued, "but whatever you said to him, it reached something. He's more present with the children than he's been in years." We watched as Nathan showed Emma how to hold the oars, his patience evident even from a distance. Lucas leaned over the side, pointing at something in the water, and Nathan's arm shot out protectively to steady him. A father's instinct, still intact beneath the layers of whatever pain had driven him to such destructive behavior. When they returned to shore, Nathan approached the porch alone, hesitating at the bottom step. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice different, steadier, more sober than I'd heard in months. We walked along the lakeshore, far enough from the house to speak privately, but still within sight of Vanessa and the children. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the water, turning it to hammered gold. "I've rented an apartment," he began. "Started therapy. I'm seeing the kids 3 times a week now." "I'm glad," I said simply. He stopped walking, turned to face me directly. "You were right, Mom, about everything. I ran from my responsibilities. I used your generosity. I destroyed the dream you worked your entire life for." I didn't respond immediately, watching a pair of ducks glide across the lake's surface, leaving twin trails in their wake. "You know what hurt the most?" I finally asked. "Seeing you transform into someone I didn't recognize, someone who lies, who abandons his own children, who doesn't respect others' space. That's not the man I raised." "I know that now," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "and I want to fix everything, starting here." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in months: humility. Not the calculated remorse designed to manipulate, but genuine recognition of harm done. "It won't be quick or easy," I warned him. "Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight." "I know," he nodded. "I'm not asking for forgiveness yet, just a chance to earn it." As we walked back toward the house, I felt a cautious hope unfurling. Not a naive belief that everything would immediately be restored, but a recognition that healing, however slow and painful, was at least possible. The children left with Vanessa and Nathan as the sun began to set. Standing on the porch, waving as their cars disappeared down the driveway, I felt the weight of solitude settle around me once more. But it was different now. Not the heavy silence of abandonment, but the gentle quiet of possibility. In the months that followed, a new pattern emerged. Nathan would bring the children to the lake house every other weekend. Not for parties, but for family time. He would help me with projects around the property: repainting the shed, fixing the dock, clearing fallen branches after storms. Small acts of restoration that seemed to mirror his own internal work. Vanessa and I developed a friendship that surprised us both. She would sometimes come alone for coffee, and in those quiet conversations, I learned the fuller truth of her marriage to Nathan. How he had gradually withdrawn emotionally years before the actual separation. How she had tried counseling, date nights, every intervention she could think of to reach him. How the divorce had been his decision, not hers, though he'd told me the opposite. "I think he was looking for an escape," she confided one afternoon as we sat on the porch. "From responsibility, from adulthood, from the fear of failing as a husband and father." "Like his father did," I said softly, the realization dawning as I spoke it. "By dying." Vanessa looked at me sharply. He told me once that his greatest fear was abandoning his children the way Frank abandoned him. I told him Frank didn't choose to die, but he said it didn't matter. The result was the same. The words hit me with the force of revelation. All these years, I had believed I was honoring Frank's memory by emphasizing his virtues to Nathan, by holding him up as the perfect father taken too soon. Had I inadvertently created an impossible standard? Had my own unresolved grief transferred to my son in ways I never intended? These questions formed the foundation of the conversations Nathan and I began having, tentatively at first, then with increasing honesty. One evening in early fall, as we sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed during an overnight visit, he broached the subject directly. "I need to tell you something, Mom," he said, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "I've been angry at Dad my whole life. For dying. For leaving you alone. For not being there when I needed him." The admission hung between us, heavy with decades of unspoken pain. "I understand," I said finally. "I was angry too, for a long time." He turned to me, surprise evident in his expression. "You never showed it. You always talked about him like he was perfect." "Because that's what I thought you needed," I explained. "A hero to look up to, not a mother bitter about being widowed at 28. "What I needed," he said quietly, "was to know it was okay to be angry, to be scared, to be imperfect." In that moment, I saw with painful clarity how my strength, the very quality that had sustained us through the difficult years, had also created a wall between us. By never showing vulnerability, by never acknowledging my own struggles, I had unintentionally taught Nathan that emotions were weaknesses to be hidden rather than experiences to be shared. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." He reached for my hand in the darkness. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry too. For everything." When autumn painted the trees around Lake Wintergreen in brilliant reds and golds, Nathan surprised me with an unexpected proposal. "I've scheduled a family therapy session," he said during Sunday lunch. "Me, you, Vanessa, and the kids. If you want to participate." The therapist, Dr. Marion Lewis, was a woman in her 60s with gentle eyes and a direct manner that reminded me of Agnes. In her office, surrounded by plants and natural light, our family began the slow, painful work of excavating the past to understand the present. It was during one of these sessions that Nathan finally articulated what had been building inside him for decades. "You were perfect, Mom," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Strong, tireless, dedicated. How could I compete with that?" When my marriage began to fail, I felt it confirmed what I had always feared, that I was a failure. I stared at my son, seeing for the first time how the very qualities I had cultivated to survive, strength, independence, tireless work ethic, had cast a shadow over his development. How my well-intentioned sacrifices had become burdens he felt compelled to carry. "Nathan," I replied, reaching for his hands across the space between our chairs, "I spent my life trying to be strong for you. I never realized that could make you feel weak. Forgive me for not seeing this sooner." Dr. Lewis gently guided us through these revelations, helping us understand how grief, unprocessed and unacknowledged, had shaped our family dynamics, how Nathan's fear of abandonment had manifested in self-sabotage, how my fear of vulnerability had created emotional distance. "Families often develop patterns in response to trauma," she explained. "These patterns serve a purpose initially. They help you survive. But eventually, they can become constraints rather than supports." The therapy continued through winter and into spring. Sometimes the sessions included Vanessa and the children, focusing on rebuilding trust and establishing healthy boundaries. Other times, it was just Nathan and me, delving into our shared past with new understanding. Slowly, tentatively, our family began to heal. Not back to what it had been, that was impossible and perhaps undesirable, but forward into something new, something more honest, more resilient, more real. Nathan and Vanessa did not reconcile romantically, but they developed a co-parenting relationship built on mutual respect. Nathan remained in his apartment near their house, committed to being present in his children's daily lives. He started coaching Lucas's soccer team, never missing a game or practice. He attended every one of Emma's dance recitals, sitting in the front row with flowers for after the performance. And the lake house, my dream, my sanctuary, evolved as well. It remained my home, my primary residence, but it also became a gathering place, a neutral ground where our reconstructed family could come together without the weight of past conflicts. Today, 1 year after that terrible summer, I sit on my porch watching. The sunset paint the lake in shades of amber and rose. The evening is cool, hinting at the approaching autumn. From inside the house comes the sound of Emma practicing piano, the notes floating through the open windows like birds taking flight. Nathan is teaching Lucas to fish off the dock, their silhouettes dark against the glittering water. Vanessa sits at the picnic table nearby, grading papers, occasionally looking up to smile at their progress. Agnes will arrive tomorrow for her weekly visit, bringing fresh bread from the bakery in town and stories from her volunteer work at the library. The silence I once craved has been replaced by something more valuable, the sound of a family reconnecting, healing, the sound of children's laughter, honest conversations, forgiveness. I understand now that I sacrificed so much for the house of my dreams that I almost lost what really mattered, the family I worked my entire life for. My son needed not only my example of strength, but also my vulnerability, to know that I make mistakes too, that I also have fears. The house remains on the shores of Lake Wintergreen. The waters still reflect the sky like liquid gold at dusk. But now, when I observe this natural spectacle, I'm not alone on the porch, and I've discovered there's more peace in this company than in all the silence I once desired. Have you ever noticed that sometimes we must lose something precious to recognize its true value? That wisdom often comes only after we've walked through fire? As I watch my family move through the golden evening light, I think about all the women my age sitting alone in houses they worked their whole lives to obtain, surrounded by beautiful things but separated from the messy, complicated love of family. I think about how easily I could have been one of them, clinging to my dream of perfect solitude while life's most important connections withered from neglect. The journey hasn't been easy. There are still days when old patterns emerge, when Nathan withdraws or I become too rigid. There are moments when the children's energy overwhelms my desire for quiet, when the compromise of shared space feels more burden than blessing. But then there are evenings like this one, when the light falls just so across the water, when my grandson runs up from the dock with his first caught fish, his face alight with pride, calling, "Grandma, look!" And in those moments, I know with absolute certainty that this messy, imperfect togetherness is the true dream I was working toward all along. If this story touched your heart, like and share, because sometimes hearing another woman's pain is what makes us feel less alone